I had no idea you could milk a cat.
Oh, yeah, you can milk anything with nipples.
I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me?
It's Britney, bitch.
And the Iraq, everywhere, like, such as.
I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Out, Charlie! Out!
Our next door neighbors are foreign countries.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Remember Shuffle. My name is Ben. With me as always is my co-host Giordano.
Hey, wow, this is so cool. I'm on the podcast. Got a new mic stand. It's made from Bolivian wormwood. Yeah, a friend of mine made it for me, actually. Blood brother. I pulled him out of the rubble of 9/11.
Excellent. And today we are discussing a quintessential, pivotal, indescribably important comedy franchise from the 2000s, Meet the Parents / Meet the Fockers / Little Fockers. Giordano, why are we doing this?
Well, we just finished an episode on the drone program. We're doing another one on McDonald's.
The poison we put in our bodies.
Yeah, on the agricultural business in the 2000s. And it's just very dark. And I know that what the world needs now is not another podcast episode about a movie. These are just so much easier and more enjoyable to do. So if you're listening to the podcast for the first time, you're like, let me see what these shuffle boys have to say about society. Don't listen to this one. This one is for the real heads who just want to listen to Ben and I have a good time.
Not every episode can be a we live in a society episode, okay?
Sometimes an episode has to be, dang, that movie sure was funny. I don't care who you are. That Greg Focker's one funny dude.
Yes, this is the podcast equivalent to a tight 90-minute comedy. Sometimes you just want to have a good time.
Right. And I think that this movie will be fun to talk about because, unfortunately, because of a million different reasons that people have postulated, they don't really make comedies anymore. We do get some dramedies. So it's nice to go back to this lost art form. Comedy ages poorly, generally speaking, right? But this is made 25 years ago. The cultural context to basically all of this fits into our modern world without any changes at all. Maybe a little bit less so with the sequels, but yeah, you know, you're meeting someone's parents, you're desperate for their approval, and there's a lot of tension there. So it's rich for comedy.
Yeah, many aspects of comedy definitely age very poorly, but there are definitely some universals. I was thinking about the fact that virtually all Shakespearean comedies, and then many of the Greek and Roman comedies, end with a wedding. This is the telos, as Aristotle would say. The goal of a comedy is some kind of happily ever after with a wedding. And I'm painting with a broad brush here and being a little bit simplistic, but there is something to be said about just doing something very well, of having a genre with certain conventions and then executing those conventions exceptionally well. Not everything needs to be innovative. Not everything needs to delve into the depths of the human psyche and deal with trauma. I'm not going to beat the same drum that everyone and your mother has done and talk about how the bear wins.
I was just thinking about the bear, because if you were to ask, hey, what's the most critically acclaimed comedy right now? People would probably say The Bear. And if you watched that first episode of season 3, you would be like, could you have spared us a joke?
Yeah, I feel like the path that diverged is comedies became dramedies. And then the other one, probably partially because of Jon Stewart and the rise of political satire, comedies have to have political points. I've told Giordano before, if you trace the career of Adam McKay, he goes from making Step Brothers, which is a totally apolitical film that will leave you a dumber, worse person than you were when you entered the theater. He goes from making films like that to making Don't Look Down or The Other Guys, which I love. I fucking love The Other Guys. But it can't just be a straight comedy anymore. It has to be something about Ponzi schemes and Wall Street.
You will never get me to say anything against Adam McKay. I love him. He's awesome.
Even Don't Look Down?
Don't Look Up.
Fuck.
The meteor is coming from space. I don't know, man. I watched it with my parents. It gave us a nice evening, I suppose. I'm not going to say it's his best work, but this podcast isn't going to be our best work either. I mean, don't you love Succession? Don't you love the other guys? I liked that Dick Cheney movie he made.
Mm-hmm.
I like a number of his movies. I think that The Big Short is probably one of my favorite movies ever.
Oh, yeah. Of those two paths that the comedy took, I definitely prefer the latter to the dramedy. I'm kind of over the dramedy for sure.
Right.
Couldn't get into the bear.
I see what you're saying. No, now that I'm naming all of these movies, I'm like, they are pretty politics adjacent. Whereas Anchorman was vaguely about sexism. You know, Anchorman 2 is also about the news industry.
Hey, Giordano, quote one line from Anchorman 2 for me.
I'm in a glass case of emotion.
Yeah, I think that story tells it all. The most quotable film of the 2000s that every millennial man probably has memorized was succeeded by a film that nobody can cite a single line from.
Wow. Yeah, come to think of it, I can't. I mean, I've only seen it probably once, but...
Yep. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, that is funny, because I remember when Borat 2 came out, people were saying that it might have been as good as the first.
I don't think there's any iconic lines from Borat 2, and I think the thing that people most remember is the Rudy Giuliani sting operation,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
Like the news stories surrounding Borat 2.
Yeah, so we'll Meet the Parents the old shuffle treatment. We'll be talking about class, race science, the CIA, all of our favorite shuffle themes.
It'll be fun to look at what is, as we've said, a dead genre.
It's like we've lost the ability to make the art, which is crazy because it seems pretty straightforward. I don't know, you like find some situation that is relatable and has tension and then have things go horribly wrong in the worst case scenario. So let's set up the movie a little bit. This is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but for a Jewish man. Right? He's in a WASP household on Long Island in Gatsby country on the North Shore. And the cultural differences between working class Jewish Greg and the Burnses are exacerbated all weekend. Their family is emotionally cold. He's made to say grace. They're competitive. They're all in opposition to Greg's sort of everyman status. This is a remake. The independent film industry in the 90s was very different from what it was today. It was like a Gen X thing. They were all making these independent films and going to Sundance and stuff. So
yeah, it was the film that the character in Rent was trying to make. The original Meet the Parents.
Right. I think Louis C.K. called it like one of the funniest movies he's ever seen. It's made by this guy, Greg. I watched a few clips from it. It was very funny. There's a scene in which he ruins the roast. In the past, people have complained in the comments that we don't do enough plot summary. The reason we don't do that is because it feels like reading Wikipedia, but we actually have time on this week because this is sort of a slow week at the Take Factory. So let's give it a shot at actually summarizing the beats and see if people like that at all. Okay, so Greg Fokker, played by Ben Stiller, he's a male nurse. Can you imagine? He plans to propose to his teacher girlfriend, Pam, and he hears that, hey, her father, his future father-in-law potentially, he's an old school guy. He would appreciate being asked for permission, for his blessing, rather, before he proposes. So this is a big weekend for Greg. He's not only going to meet the parents, but he's also going to ask for their blessing in marrying his girlfriend that he's had for 10 months, which I feel like that's like a very boomer thing, right? To be like, yeah, I've been dating my gal for 10 months. It's time to get married.
Yeah. And the stress is elevated because he is traveling to meet her parents for his potentially future sister-in-law's wedding. Because Pam's sister is getting married at the Burns family household. She moved her wedding up very abruptly. It's a high-stress environment, right? Weddings are high-stress pressure cookers anyways, with all the planning and logistics and emotions and drama. And now we have the added layer of meeting his future in-laws for the first time and asking for permission to marry their daughter.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that Greek comedies always end at a wedding, because I feel like so many of our comedies in this era also do. Like, Wedding Crashers ends at a wedding, and it doesn't fit at all. It's like one of the worst endings in a movie I've ever seen. The idea that Owen Wilson would come into the wedding and disrupt it and make it about him is an insane thing to do. But it works in this movie because this movie is very grounded. And we'll talk about this more when we get into the sequels, because I do want to talk about the sequels, but they really get away from that groundedness quite a bit. So we go to the Burns' home, beautiful, large house on the North Shore of Long Island, and we live in these real moments, right? That first conversation, Greg's trying to ingratiate himself. We've all been there. You know, we've all seeked someone's
sought. We've all sucked people's validation right off.
Yeah, we've all sought to suck. And, he's making these little jokes. Hey, you got another guy to leave the toilet seat up around the house. And they're not landing. His girlfriend not helping him out either at all. Something's up with Terry Polo in this series. We'll talk about this more later, but they never give her anything to do beyond being mean to Greg and then saying she loves him. I think she might have borderline personality disorder. Yeah, how would you describe Jack? He's like stern, sort of not humorous, serious.
He is painfully literal, which is part of why all the jokes don't land. There isn't an ounce of levity in him. And this is a man who, I don't know if he passed grade 9 or 10 English, because he doesn't seem to understand the concept of a metaphor or an allegory. None of that in his house.
What's the example from that conversation?
Puff the Magic Dragon,
right.
Of course.
Well, okay, yeah, so there's all these little great details, like the phone rings, and Jack is very quick to go get the phone, right? I'll get it. And then he's pouring out the Tom Collins. He's created a ruse so that he has an excuse to leave the house. They insist that Greg goes with him, and we have this great, awkward car ride between Greg Fokker and Jack Burns.
It's a big day Saturday.
Yes. It's cars. You got, what do you use, unleaded? Regular unleaded?
Premium.
Uh-huh.
And I've been in that situation. It is so awkward. It's a brand new person. You have nothing in common, and you're like a salesman for yourself, basically. Mm-hmm. And he puts on Peter, Paul, and Mary, who you may remember us talking about in our 2004 election episode, the favorite band of John Kerry, Pedro of Peter, Paul, and Mary. And they begin talking about Puff the Magic Dragon, and Greg alludes to the fact that, it may have been an allegory for smoking pot.
Yes, and I say he's painfully literal because Robert De Niro's Jack Burns responds, Puff is simply the name of the boy's magical dragon. A very funny scene, because again, he is so desperate. Desperation is the word that springs to mind when you think about Greg Fokker. So he wants to show that he knows anything about Peter, Paul, and Mary. And the only thing he can think of is the thing that everyone knows, which is that Puff the Magic Dragon is an allegory for smoking marijuana. But even that doesn't land.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Robert De Niro lines, and I apologize for jumping ahead, but at one point he finds his son's pipe for smoking marijuana, and his son, desperate to find a lie, says, I think it's some kind of sculpture, and says that it's Greg's. And Robert De Niro delivers the line, Denny, this is not a sculpture. This is a device for ingesting marijuana. Something of that nature.
So they get to the general store or whatever and get a nice little guest appearance from Judah Friedlander, who tells him that they don't have any champagne nicer than Mums, and that if he wants to spend more, he can simply buy more bottles of Mums.
Yep.
But this is where we get more indications of maybe Jack might not be fully truthful about himself. He's meeting covertly with a man in the parking lot, and Greg inches towards them, sort of spying on their conversation. And what this results in is that he is half caught by Jack and forced into picking up a nearby magazine in order to cover why he's been standing so close to them. When Jack asks what he's been reading, he's forced to reveal that it's open to a page on breast pumps. Always, whatever the worst possible situation is, that's what's going to happen to Greg this weekend.
Yes.
This is the beginning of random chance affecting him in the worst way.
One of the reasons I love this scene is that he comes up with a crazy lie. He panics. He's desperate. He comes up with a lie. He says, I lived on a farm. That's why he's reading about breast pumps. And the funniest fucking thing about this scene, what is Greg's job? He's a fucking nurse.
Right.
He could say he's working in a NICU unit or whatever.
Yeah,
he's working in a maternity ward. Like, he has so many easier lies, but he panics and he comes up with a very dumb one. What makes this movie work in so many ways is that, yes, Greg is comically unlucky. Insane things happen to him. Like, the reason they have to go to the grocery store is that the airline lost his luggage. And so he needs to buy deodorant and a toothbrush and all this stuff. And so that's the ostensible reason for him riding in the car with Jack there. And of course, the engagement ring was in the suitcase. Yes, bad, random things happen to him. And on top of that, he also digs his own grave constantly. Every action he takes only makes everything worse. which is very, very funny.
Right, because he's a good person, but he tells small lies. We're going to see this happen throughout the movie. This is a recurring theme of Greg's personality, that he's ultimately a good person who's put in bad circumstances and is forced into this moral gray area where he lies, and that lie only begets larger problems, which then forces him to lie more, right? And so this is the beautiful theme of the movie, is watching this good person make a small mistake, which results in a small immoral activity, which then results in a larger mistake, which results in a larger immoral activity. And it's a really good way to empathize with a hero who is doing the wrong thing repeatedly, right? It is like wrong to lie about farming in Detroit on like the weekend where you're supposed to propose to your girlfriend, right? This lie, I will say, is a little beyond the pale. Like you said, it's probably mostly driven by nervousness, right? He could just say, hey, yeah, I'm an ICU nurse. But he's so nervous that he tells this ridiculous lie, which is a little unreasonable, but it does lead to one of the best lines in the movie, because then we get the dinner scene, which is, I think, it may be my favorite scene in the entire movie. The most iconic, just bit of good old clean family comedy. Greg's forced into this lie about pumping, which leads to him describing a story in which he's breastfeeding kittens.
He's milking a cat.
He's milking a cat, yeah. And then the most famous line from the movie, I have nipples, Greg, can you milk me? Beautiful. And then we got Chekhov's champagne bottle. So as Greg tries to open it, what happens? Of course, cork comes off, hits the urn. Jack's mother's cremated remains are in.
Yeah, and the urn shatters. And one of the things I love most about this movie, it reminded me a lot of Die Hard in a way. In Die Hard, if you rewatch Die Hard, every single line of dialogue in those first 20 minutes, no matter how minor, is called back to in some way later in the movie. So when Bruce Willis's John McClane meets his separated wife at Nakatomi Tower, and there's the cokehead businessman who's clearly flirting with his separated wife, he points out that somebody has a Rolex. And later in the movie, as Hans Gruber is hanging from the building, it's like the Rolex that slips off that causes his eventual death. There's all these little details that are pointed out, and then later in the movie, you see them, and you're like, oh shit, that's the thing. It calls back to that thing before, right? Giordano just called it Chekhov's champagne bottle. And there's a little line about the cat, Mr. Jinxie, that Jack Byrne fawns upon. They trained the cat to use the toilet, but the cat did it very begrudgingly. The cat wants desperately to pee on litter and will dig any chance it gets. So as soon as you, the audience member, see the urn crash and the ashes on the floor and the cat move, you know what's coming and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And you just sit there in hilarious, excruciating discomfort, agony, as you see every single thing this desperate man gets to seek approval just blow up in his face.
Yes, exactly. And we've seen so much great characterization of Jack Burns in this scene as well. The one thing that he shows emotion about is his mother, right? So it's like raising the stakes on his mother's ashes being desecrated. He tells the least cryptic poem ever about her death.
Yeah.
I've always struggled with poetry myself because I'm not good at
figurative language,
ambiguous meaning. So I need things to be clear. And he's telling this poem which is not obfuscated at all what he feels.
Yeah.
I selfishly tried to keep you here while the cancer ate away your organs.
Yes. And viewers at the time would probably know from the trailer, even though Greg doesn't, that, spoiler alert, Robert De Niro is not a florist, as his cover story said, but was rather a CIA operative of some kind. So even in his poem, he says, as the cancer ate away at your organs like a rebel force.
Yeah, I love all these little clues that we're getting that something is up. I love rewatching this movie. I probably do it at least once every 2 years because all of these lines, they work if you know he's in the CIA and also if you don't know he's in the CIA, right? Greg gives him the Jerusalem bulb and he doesn't recognize it.
Well, no, Greg gives him a pot full of dirt. And again, something that doesn't land because it's kind of a thoughtful gift if Robert De Niro were telling the truth and he were a horticulturist. Again, Greg tries to do the right thing. He finds one of the rarest flowers he can find, but it's just a pot of dirt. And it's also a chore because you need to water this pot of dirt for 6 months. And you see the reaction to this gift just land with a thud. And Robert De Niro makes up fake Latin about the Jerusalem bulb.
Yeah. Well, we're very much looking forward to that, Greg. So this horrible thing has happened to Jack Burns' mother's remains, and they're able to have a tenuous peace that they make up. And that night, Greg, who's staying in the basement because he cannot stay with Pam in her room, finds sort of a hidden chamber in the basement, Jack's office. And it's full of pictures of him with presidents, strange interrogation devices.
There's a photo of him with the Mujahideen. He's wearing what's essentially like a turban and a scarf, and he's posing with a bearded fighter in what appears to be Afghanistan.
And he's caught by Jack Burns, who says, anything catch your eye? And he says, oh, the lie detector test. And so this is actually something that Robert De Niro suggested for the movie, apparently, the lie detector test scene, which is brilliant because it's what's on the cover of the DVD or the Netflix product page screen. And Greg is forced to endure a lie detector test interrogation. Again, so funny. To watch someone squirm like this is very funny. I don't know why. You're watching somebody else go through something painful, like watching somebody else get hit in the balls with a football.
Hans Moleman Productions presents Man Getting Hit by Football.
This contest is over. Give that man the $10,000.
This isn't America's Funniest Home Videos.
But the ball is groin. It works at so many levels. Roll it again.
And so he's asked if he's ever seen pornographic movies. He's asked if he's ever smoked pot. And the lie detector needle, it's all over the place. And so, very funny scene. We then cut to Greg sitting on top of the bed chewing Nicorette. You feel that sense of anxiety and stress that he's dealing with. He's sitting in this ridiculous place. He's chewing too much nicotine. And he's told that Jack is actually in the CIA. 35 years. The film has this great visual language of making Greg feel uneasy and small. When he's being interrogated by Jack about the pipe, the camera's above him. The wallpaper has all these vertical lines to make it look like a prison interrogation. And so he wakes up late the next day. He's been up all night chewing Nicorette. His girlfriend did not wake him up. He has no clothes. He comes up into the kitchen and we've met the parents. Now we're going to meet the family. We're going to meet Pam's sister and Bob, who she's about to marry.
Dr. Bob.
Dr. Bob, yes, of course. And again, just a relatable situation in which everything that could go wrong does go wrong, in the sense that he's having breakfast with her family, and they're all doctors, and he's a male nurse. And of course, because they're elitists, they all assume that it's because he couldn't get into med school, because what man would only want to be a nurse, right? The natural assumption is that this level of ambition is unacceptable for a man. And, you know, he's eating a bagel. He's in his pajamas. He is very much made to be othered.
They've all been up early because Jack is fanatically punctual, and he shows up in his pajamas with bedhead.
He's had a visit from the hair fairy.
Yeah, he had a visit from the hair fairy, and they all laugh at him. Just so many humiliations that he undergoes.
Yeah, he tries to join in on their joke structure by saying he's going to make a visit to the shower fairy. Again, just nothing. Is getting nothing from them. So he borrows Denny's clothes, and they go over to Kevin's house, her ex-boyfriend.
Played by Owen Wilson.
And I love this character. He's just a guy who is very stupid, but also has lucked into fabulous wealth. It's the exact opposite type of guy. If they used to date your ex, this is not who you want it to be, because the anxiety is, oh, well, does she feel like she made the wrong decision? That she should still be with this guy who's wildly successful, an artisan.
Lives in a mansion that he got through stocks, through his stock portfolio.
Yeah. Oh, the wireless industry's really taken off. These floors are Bolivian wormwood. I think that made the right call. It really ties the room together.
Yeah. And in terms of the psychological torture that Greg has to undergo, he just found out the previous night from the woman that he's been dating for 10 months that she was engaged to this guy. He had never known that she had a fiance. And she tries to make him feel better by saying, oh, but it was a purely physical sexual connection.
Again, yeah, just why would you say that? She can never really articulate why it didn't work out with Kevin beyond saying, I was never in love with him, I was in love with you, which doesn't feel overly reassuring, given that it's like, well, is there any elaboration to why you were never in love with him, or what it is about me that makes you love me? So he has pictures of Pam and him doing all of these outrageously elaborate things like skydiving and whatnot.
Skiing, they're on the beach together. Yeah.
He's carved the altar for the wedding out of one piece of wood. Yeah. It took me over 70 hours, which is hilarious. And yeah, they're playing volleyball. And Greg, he's not quite as athletic as the Burns. Like I said, he's othered. They're in the in-group. They play volleyball. He doesn't. If you've ever played volleyball, it really sucks to be the one person who's not as good because you will be targeted and it kind of ruins the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a rhythm to volleyball. And if one person is bad, it ruins the rhythm. The game isn't fun for anyone. And so Greg, who's failing time after time, finally is able to strike the ball in the way that he's supposed to. And this results in him breaking the nose of the bride. Like just the absolute worst feeling that you could have.
Yeah, he cannot win. They're chewing him out for being terrible at volleyball. And then when he really tries and puts on a display of physical athleticism, he potentially ruins the wedding that's going to be happening that weekend.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, let me ruin my own wedding. I don't want to ruin someone else's wedding. That feels so much worse, right? It's like being responsible, especially for people whose validation I want. Now the bride has a swollen eye, broken nose.
The one other humiliation in this scene is that they force Greg to go swimming even though he has no bathing suit. Right. And Owen Wilson says, "You can borrow mine." And of course they put him in a Speedo.
Yes.
It reminds me of like how the QAnon guys assume that any time a male actor is forced to like strip down to some kind of ritualized humiliation, this is what this is. And hey man, Ben Stiller was looking pretty fit, all things considered.
Yeah, he looked great.
Looked great. Nothing to be embarrassed about. But yes, he is forced into someone else's bathing suit, forced to literally expose himself to these people, to make him feel even more vulnerable.
I love the way that this movie finds new ways to humiliate Greg and strip him of the things that make him himself. His own clothes, his habits like smoking cigarettes, his personality that he has to conform to. He's really stressed in so many different ways in this movie. And they come home after the volleyball fiasco to find that the house has been flooded with the septic tank as a result of Greg flushing the toilet and having that run all night. Now, I've overflown a septic tank at a friend's house before. Does not feel good. I was scrambling. I flushed. It was after a big night. The basement started flooding. Poop water. I'm running around before anyone wakes up. It's one more humiliation for Greg. And honestly, this one, I don't even blame on him. I mean, this is Jack Burns' fault. If you're hosting a wedding, get the septic tank emptied. What are you supposed to do? Like, just deal with a full septic tank all weekend? That's on Jack.
Yeah, they also put him in a room with an ensuite bathroom that you're not allowed to flush. The thing that's like basically muscle memory after you go to the bathroom.
So Greg, thankfully, he's gotten his suitcase finally from Jerry from Parks and Rec, actually. Another great little extra. And the lock won't open. And so he's like, oh, damn, this isn't even the right suitcase. So he calls the airline. While he's distracted on the phone, he lets the cat out accidentally. And so he's forced to chase it onto the roof where he sees his cigarettes that have been thrown there by Pam in a scene that we watched. Another, like you said, the connective tissue of details from the beginning coming back later. Beautiful. He proceeds to then light the house on fire as well as the altar, like it's been hit by a Hellfire missile.
Yeah, the lawn is flooded with shit. He actually starts two fires because the leaves in the eavesdrop catch fire from his cigarette. He tries to stomp to put it out, and it hits a wire, which starts an electrical fire, which burns down the altar for the wedding. He cannot catch a break.
Yeah, he also loses the cat in the process and rips the collar off of the cat. Shout out to the commenter, by the way, who mentioned that Hellfire missiles having a blast radius of 20 meters. It seems precise, but 20 meters is also 65 feet. And they pointed out that this is basically something with the blast radius of like a baseball diamond.
Surgical, clinical, precision.
So Greg's, this is as bad as it. No, I mean, it gets worse, but it's starting to really have an inflection point of people aren't willing to forgive this level of fucking up. So he is tasked with finding Jinx because he's not involved in the rehearsal. And to him, this represents like his one opportunity to make the weekend right, ingratiate himself. But he can't find the cat. But he does find a cat who looks exactly like Jinx, but with a little bit of white on the tail. And, you know, we talked earlier about Greg being this tragic figure of someone who needs to lie with increasingly larger levels of immorality. And this is as bad as it gets. He spray paints the cat's tail and returns it as Jinx, and he's immediately rewarded for it. He is in. Jack tells him, you are back in the circle of trust. People are smiling when they see him. They're laughing at his jokes. He mentions that he's going to visit the urinal fairy, and they're howling. Greg is no longer the other. He's in.
He saved the wedding because that stupid cat that Jack worshipped is going to be the ring bearer.
Right. And so they go to dinner. There's a car racing scene home. This is probably the one scene in the movie that they maybe could have cut, is the car race home. It doesn't really add much. There's also no stakes because if Greg gets home first, like, so what, you know? So the cat has ruined everything of value in the home. The stray cat has ripped up the wedding dress, destroyed everything. And so this is the emotional low point of the movie. And Greg is revealed in front of the family to have done this immoral thing, which is not defensible by Pam. You know, it's not just something where you got unlucky. You made a choice to be deliberately dishonest, and he's kicked out of the house.
And he thinks he has a trump card because all weekend there's been a little bit of spy versus spy action going on, because Jack Burns, who is obsessed with honesty and thinks Greg is a chronic liar, he's running background checks on him, is also hiding something, and Greg is kind of on it. And so he tries to play this trump card where he lists all of the things that he saw Jack do and makes the accusation that he's still in the CIA. But lo and behold, it is revealed that he was planning a surprise honeymoon for the daughter whose wedding it is to Thailand. That's why he was talking Thai on the phone. That's why he was meeting the man in the parking lot of the convenience store to get the visas and the passport or whatever. So Greg has done one more thing to ruin the wedding, which is ruin this major surprise.
So yeah, he leaves for the airport, has another argument about his bag. He's arrested. But at this point, Pam and Dina have a heart-to-heart with Jack, where Jack realizes that everything that Greg has done was because he seeks his approval so much, not necessarily because he's just a bad person.
And maybe psychologically torturing someone is not setting them up for success.
Exactly, right. So Jack rushes to the airport to reconcile with Greg, spring him from custody, and give him his blessing. So yeah, the movie ends with Greg proposing, happy ending, and there you go. All the commenters who say we never plot summarize, there's 20 minutes of a plot summary. I don't know how exciting that was. So yeah, a little history about this movie. Like I said, 1993 indie movie, cost $35,000 to make. What a beautiful thing. It takes place in Chicago, which is why I think Pam and Greg are from Chicago. Also because they need to be flying from somewhere that isn't Long Island. Steven Spielberg and Soderbergh were initially attached to the project. Spielberg wanted to cast Al Pacino as Jack and Jim Carrey as Greg. Apparently Jim Carrey's actually the one who added the Fokker as the last name as an idea, which does seem like kind of a Jim Carrey idea. Obviously, Ben Stiller is so much better at playing someone seeking approval and validation. I feel like Jim Carrey, he plays more like someone who's doing whatever he wants.
Yeah. I like to imagine, like, what would this movie look like with some of these different roles? Robert De Niro is so good at playing a straight, stern man. Right. I feel like Al Pacino can be a little bit more exuberant. Right. Especially late 90s, early 2000s Pacino.
Yeah, if you've seen Heat, you know, you can kind of imagine, I don't know, Greg, I have nipples. Can you milk me? I'm watching you, and I will bring you down. I will bring you down to Chinatown.
I have here in the notes that Christopher Walken was also considered for the role of Jack Burns.
Yeah, this one I think would have worked. You know, it's a very similar sensibility that Walken usually plays. I can imagine Christopher Walken giving the line about cats and dogs. 2 mice fell into a bucket of cream. It's the same kind of thing as, you see, Greg, when you yell at a dog is very easy to break, Greg. Are you a pothead fucker? Are you a pothead fucker?
I just feel like it would be hard to believe Christopher Walken is a CIA asset, because whoever he was spying against would be like, oh yeah, I know who the mole is. It's the guy with that voice. He sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, true.
That cadence that no human has, that's native to no region of America, it's that guy.
Little funny note about the Fokker name that we were just talking about. The film was only rated PG-13 if they found someone in the United States with the last name Fokker to show that this wasn't their attempt to cover up the F word, that this was a real human name. And they did find someone. So shout out to the Fokkers.
And huge proof that you can't have too much of a good thing. There is just enough Fokker wordplay in the first one, and then they crank that dial up to 11 in the second one. It's like, did you meet his son, Ornery Fokker? It's like, Ornery's not a name.
Yeah, and like even the Gaylord, his first name is Gaylord, which is only introduced in like the last 5 minutes of the movie. And that becomes a major point of focus in that sequel for sure. Okay, so let's move on to themes. First, we'll just talk about the theme of Jewish people as sort of liminal to American culture at large, right? We have this sense that, especially I think in the 90s, that our hero is unlike the wasps that he's trying to ingratiate himself with, right? Which is a nice addition they made to the independent movie that was made. And I don't want to just read Wikipedia, but there are some good points in there about how, up until this point, many of the Jewish characters in comedy, they represent the schlemiel archetype. Ben, are you familiar with the schlemiel?
I am not. What is that?
He's the fool. Someone like George Costanza is a schlemiel, like a Larry David character. And I think that the point that some academics have made is that Greg represents a transition in Jewish heroes in that he is not the butt of the joke, but someone that you are sympathetic and ultimately triumphant and someone that you root for, right? Rather than just taking joy in their demise, right? We get all of these references to his class differences, right? He sleeps in the basement. His job is different. In that first scene with the Burnses, he goes in for a hug with Dina, who then wants to shake his hand. Little small moments like this highlight the cultural divide between Greg's emotional intimacy and the coldness of the Burnses.
Yeah, it's strongly implied that he's a secular Jew also. So they say grace. They're probably like Episcopalian or one of the WASP Christianities. Again, an excruciating scene where they ask Greg if he'll say grace. Pam says Greg's Jewish, and Robert De Niro says, "You tell me Jews don't pray?" And sure enough, secular Jews don't say grace. And a beautiful, excruciating scene as Greg just stammers through words that sound vaguely biblical to him.
Yeah, no, he's quoting a musical.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, very funny scene, by day, by day, by day. And this is something they play up a lot in the sequel, Meet the Fockers. We meet Greg's parents, and they're very Jewish, Barbara Streisand, Dustin Hoffman, and they're incredibly honest and open and emotionally intimate with each other. And that's sort of the main thing they're playing with in that sequel. The Burnses, who are cold, and which sort of nurturing method is better? The Ferberizing, characterized by the Burnses, never pick up a child who's crying, teach them to self-soothe, and the Fockers, overwhelm them with unconditional love. That's part of what I liked about Meet the Fockers, which it's not as good as a movie, obviously. I think it's watchable, especially if you love the first. But I think that is sort of an interesting idea to play with. We get to see where Greg comes from, and it's a place of unconditional love and honesty and openness. More on this, the Jewish Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Greg presents the Jerusalem bulb to Jack, an obvious metaphor for the Jewish seed that he'd like to plant in the Burns' soil. We get references to the fact that she has to change her name, right? Her last name from Burns to Fokker, this thing that is ridiculous and maybe unbecoming of his family. And then to boot with all of this tension, Kevin, her ex-boyfriend, Owen Wilson, he is someone who fits very well into this world, right? He's rich, he is Christian, he's successful. And then to make it even more aggravating, not only is Kevin fit in this world, but he's also very knowledgeable of Greg's. He says, it's an altar, or as you might call it, a chuppah.
Yeah, I see Greg in his tragic journey. I see a little bit of the Greek tragic hero. So Aristotle wrote a work called The Poetics, which was his treatise on literary theory. And we actually don't have what he wrote on comedy. That's lost to time. But we have what he wrote on tragedy. And he said the ideal tragic hero is not a fundamentally good person that bad shit happens to, because that would make us too sad. And the purpose of tragedy is to evoke the emotions of both pity and fear, because that could be us. And then we walk out of the theater having undergone catharsis, purification. So if the hero is too good and bad shit happens to them, it's too sad, no catharsis. If the hero is evil and bad things happen to them, we feel good, they got their comeuppance. But the tragic hero is one who is mostly a good or noble person, but who makes a tragic mistake. The Greek hamartain, to miss the mark, is what that verb means. So it's someone who makes an understandable mistake. And because of this mistake, they face the consequences of their actions. And this is Greg!
Absolutely. So he's in a Greek tragedy right now, which I think makes sense because, we mentioned that this is a remake. The original 1993 version ends with the bride, she's not the bride in the original remake, but Pam's sister hangs herself, and upon finding the body, Jack gets his gun and mistakenly kills both his wife and Pam.
And then has a fatal heart attack.
Oh, yeah. And then Jack has a fatal heart attack himself. So the original, much more in line with the structure of a Greek tragedy, both in the main story and the ending.
And the body count.
So, yeah, that's our first theme on the Jewish hero in the Wasp House. The next point is about the CIA and the surveillance state. The Central Lack of Intelligence Agency, as Dustin Hoffman calls it in the second movie. CLIA. This movie is so prophetic in so many ways because this movie is made pre 9/11, and yet it fits so perfectly, like Black Hawk Down, into a post 9/11 world. One in which Jack is doing Patriot Act stuff. I feel like you see this a lot in art from the 2000s, is like people trying to talk about what's going on with the Patriot Act, like The Dark Knight. And it's like, this movie is also doing that, but before trying too hard to do that. And so it's really nice. Jack has developed nanny cams that he's produced in retirement, and it allows you to spy on a nanny or anyone in your family, someone in a liminal space like Greg. And this was so prophetic because these are basically commonplace now, from what I understand, if you have a nanny. And I love that this movie predicted the future, but also that in this movie, Jack is supposed to be an insane person for using these nanny cams. And now it's just like, oh no, now everybody uses these.
Yes, everyone has become paranoid.
Exactly. And it's like, this is something the villain was doing, right? And, we love to talk about Foucault's boomerang on this pod. So I love that the first thing that happens with Jack's nanny cam is that Greg points it at Dina's crotch. So immediately, the surveillance tech that he's built to spy on his enemies is turned upon his own loved ones.
Yes,
and
true.
Violating their privacy.
Yeah, Jack's whole spiel about how dogs are easy to break is meant to be terrifying, right? This is a guy who thinks about all interactions between humans in terms of a power struggle and a power dynamic, and even the relationship between humans and pets.
Yes.
I like to imagine, instead of stumbling upon a polygraph machine when he accidentally finds Jack's office, it's just a big water jug and a towel.
Yeah, he's like, I was just admiring your water jug and towel. I know that technically torture hadn't been authorized yet, but Jack mentions that he was in Vietnam. He could have been a part of the Phoenix program.
Yeah. We talked about the Phoenix program on our Zero Dark 30 episode, in which they developed a highly sophisticated method of torture called the wall. It'd be a very different movie if Jack submitted Greg to the wall treatment.
Yeah, Meet the Fokker should have involved some of our updated CIA techniques on top of the lie detector. Yeah, so Jack is also insanely wealthy. For a guy who's like a civil servant, he lives in like a mansion, has done very well financially. So hard not to imagine that Jack has gotten involved in some drug smuggling operations. I know it's a mainstream movie, but it would have been fun for them to have made some allusions to, him benefiting from the cocaine or heroin trade, or like maybe making an offhanded comment about being in Dallas at some point, just mentioning Dallas, like No Country for Old Men did, right?
Yeah.
So he's a deep state guy. He probably wrote a scathing op-ed in the New York Times when Trump was elected. So.
Yeah, he's a CIA Democrat.
And I love that Denny, Jack's son, is actually a pothead. I think this plays with the idea that as tough and as scrutinizing as Jack is, the drugs are coming from inside the circle of trust. It's not Greg, the outsider, who's a pothead. It's his own son. Much like the USA's own drug problem. Yeah, Danny, again, this kind of cool Gen X slacker character. He's got all the fucking weird band posters on his wall. Greg tries to ingratiate himself with him by being like, yeah, Lil' Kim, she's fat.
And then it doesn't hit, and he has to add PH.
Yeah.
Something that was already out of fashion in 2000, right?
It's funny, too, because Greg is like our age. And so another great relatable situation, Greg trying to fit in with someone who, like, he's technically a young person. He's not Jack. He's not quite young enough to make this work because he's trying too hard. So I watched Little Fockers for this episode. It's so bad. They have so many scenes that are just parodies. They do like a Godfather parody scene scene. They do a Jaws parody scene. There's a Jaws parody scene where Jack and Greg are fighting. So Jack jumps into a ball pit and is going through the ball pit like a shark. Like you can't see his face, but the balls are just moving and they play the music. And it reminded me so much of Unfrosted because that's basically what every scene in Unfrosted is like. Check out our Unfrosted movie review for that.
Hey, remember Jaws?
Yeah, exactly. Remember Jaws? Remember The Godfather? They play the music. And what I like about the first movie is that they're in a funny situation, but it's not because it's a parody. It's because these are real anxieties that are relatable.
Universal, even.
Exactly. I have never been asked to be the godfather, but I have met a romantic partner's parents and been nervous about what they think of me.
You've never gotten a fight with that partner's parent in a ball pit?
No, Jesus. Doesn't that sound horrible? He like dives in there. You know, Robert De Niro is probably like 70 years old, diving into the ball pit.
Yeah.
Then another little prophetic point of this movie is the film culminates with Greg being thrown off of an airplane for saying bomb on an airplane. And he's like, you can't say bomb on an airplane. Bomb, 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 bomb. Just like another great little detail that fits perfectly into a post 9/11 world. Jay Roach was really feeling it. Jay Roach, the director, by the way, who made Austin Powers, also made this movie. Yeah. So a nice little run. I love Austin Powers. And this is a very different movie, I think. This is mostly character-driven, relatable. Austin Powers is a parody. Yeah. So Jay Roach showing a little range here.
Yeah. Another big theme is about class warfare in the suburbs. So there are a lot of jokes about Greg being a male nurse. Not quite as many as in the second one, but the reason this is so unconscionable to the Burnses is that this is a working class profession, fundamentally.
Part of it is the gender issue, but also part of it is just that he's not of the same economic class, right? The level of anxiety that a rich person might feel if their family is to take on someone from a lower class is funny and relatable and true. And Greg is made to be constantly humiliated because he followed his passion, which was helping people. He says that the reason he didn't become a doctor was because he didn't get enough time to do patient care. So it's like this very noble reason that he's eschewed financial upward mobility.
All of the Burnses and their future in-laws are obsessed with class. They call each other doctor.
Right.
And they make a joke about it where Dr. Bob says, you don't need to call me Dr. Bob. Call me Bob, MD.
That actor is great in this movie. James Redhorn is his name. If Florence Nightingale would get his shit together over here. I love that they have the neoliberal thing, too, of Greg could have become a doctor. It's not his ability that kept him away from it. He actually got 97th percentile on the MCATs.
They ask him if he's a homeowner.
Yes.
They ask him about his stock portfolio. Okay, the homeowner question isn't totally over the line, but they are prying into his economic status to judge him.
Yes, exactly. It's a repeated theme throughout the movie, and I think it's really good. I mean, again, a very relatable situation. And this series has such a weird relationship with class, I find, especially as it goes along, because the whole point of the first movie is that Greg's working class and that's okay, right? Mm-hmm. That's why he's our hero. Because he isn't concerned with material wealth the way that the Burnses are, right?
Yep.
So what happens in the sequel? Well, we come to find out, okay, Greg is working class, but he comes from the right kind of background.
Mm-hmm.
Two professionals, a doctor and a lawyer. And not only that, but their house that they live in, Greg's parents, it's just as beautiful and large as the Burns' house on Long Island. It just seems like the people who are making this series can't help themselves but make all the characters like them, you know, in that they're like highly successful elites. And then the third movie is even worse. Basically, in the third movie, everybody has like started a successful business. You know, Roz is Greg's mother, who's a sex therapist, has started selling condoms that play music. And this has become a successful business. She's a talk show host. Greg is no longer a regular nurse. He has an office. He's sort of the nurse administrator, and he's paid to do speaking engagements for a company like Viagra, which causes him some moral consideration, but it's very quickly abandoned about 20 minutes into the movie. It's just, oh, no, Greg is just going to make money doing these speaking engagements. But I just find that this whole series has a very weird relationship with class, because the first movie is about Greg being working class. It's what makes him the other. And then as the series goes on, they're just like, no, actually, Greg's background is just like the Burnses economically. And then in the third one, it's like, no, he's actually ascended to the same level of success as Dr. Bob, and he does the right thing and becomes just as successful as the Burnses.
If anything, the second movie reveals that Greg is kind of downwardly mobile. If he was the child of a doctor and a lawyer and chose to be a nurse. But then they yada, yada, yada it away. And it's like, oh no, he's like a suit-wearing office guy now. Which is hilarious because that is not the way work has gone for people over the course of the 2000s and early 2010s, right? People are more precarious than ever. People are working paycheck to paycheck more than they used to be. But in our fantasy world of the Meet the Parents franchise, people still get to move up.
Yeah. And the second movie does discuss capitalism a little bit, I think. We talked a little bit about how the Ferber method, which is professed by the Burnses, which is this idea that babies should help themselves. They shouldn't be soothed at all by the nanny parents, the nanny state parents. We get this sort of culture clash of people who reflect capitalist values of individualism versus the Fokker method, which is meant to represent love and compassion and helping. And, you know, I think Jack at one point says, competition is the one reason why America is the one remaining superpower. The whole like Fokker method as a stand-in for anti-capitalism is very funny because from what we learn about the Fokkers, they are sort of libs at best. Right? Ben, I know you really like that scene of Dustin Hoffman doing the sit-in for the bus that's taken. This is how we got stuff done in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're meant to be like aging hippies.
Exactly.
Let's move on to our complaints. No movie is perfect, and this movie certainly has some flaws. I think the most glaring flaw of this movie by far is the underdevelopment of the Pam character. Not well formed at all. Fails the Bechdel test. You never have two named women who don't talk to each other. But something other than a man. I think the conversation is about Greg when she does speak to her mother. Her entire personality is that she loves Greg, okay? We never see why they're together. Apparently, they put that photo montage of them on vacation together in the beginning because they were like, oh shit, we don't have any scene of Greg and Pam being in love, so let's just put this title sequence in. But yeah, it would have been nice to get some understanding for like, what is Pam's deal? She loves Greg, but it's never articulated why or the basis of their relationship at all. They get 3 movies to flesh this out and they never do it. Maybe Terry Polo is just like a horrible actress, but I mean, it's far more likely that the writers are just completely disinterested in ever exploring. So what's the deal with Pam?
It's a movie about the patriarchy, right? It's a movie about a man asking another man to marry his daughter. So it doesn't have a lot of room for fleshed out characters. It's a movie about how Robert De Niro is hyper controlling of his daughter in every way also. So I think given the fundamental structure of the movie, yeah, it doesn't leave a lot of room for a fully developed, fleshed out female lead.
Right. And even Dina, she has a few more wants in the third movie and the second movie where she wants to have some more sex with Jack. This is like the extent that these women are characterized at all. Is Pam wants to have sex with Greg and Dina wants to have sex with Jack.
There's so many cringy jokes in the second one where it's like, isn't it funny that old people have sex? Ostensibly, it's supposed to be Greg's mom, Roz, is a sex therapist in Florida. So, of course, her clientele skews old. And she teaches a course that's called, like, Sexy After 70 or something like that. But so many of the actual jokes are like, look at these kooky old people having sex. It is kind of punching down a little bit on the elderly.
They don't know what they're doing with these female characters in this movie. They have nothing for them to do at all. So, the other thing that I find, Greg's lies sometimes are a little beyond the pale. You have to be able to identify with Greg as being in a tough spot and doing something a little bit unreasonable. But I find Greg spiraling, lying about being on the farm, and then spray painting Jinxie Cat's tail. You sort of remove yourself a little bit from Greg when he does things like that because you're like, I would never do this. But the whole point is that he's a stand-in for your own feelings. So every now and then I was like, this is almost a little too boneheaded. But then again, at least the payoff is worth this cognitive dissonance that you have to go through and being like, oh, this good guy is spray painting a cat's tail. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about echoes in the culture. This is a cringe comedy. That is the number one source of humor in this movie is you being like, oh my God, the cat is about to shit in the ashes. He lit the altar on fire. The yard is covered in shit. You can't watch. A few times I had pulled my sweater in front of my eyes. It's one of those things that's hard to watch. And I think that that will become one of the most dominant comedy forms in the 2000s.
Yep. The Office and Curb being the two biggest examples of this.
Borat even taking it to the next level by doing it in person. And so it's like this discomfort is the main currency of the movie. Probably Meet the Parents has something to do with that. And then we can talk a little bit about franchise decline because I think these movies, it's like in the top 100 highest grossing movie series. I think that 3 of these movies are Robert De Niro's highest grossing movies. Like top 5 highest grossing movies. And so we're seeing this cute romp become a franchise and dying off a little bit each time, or a lot each time, right?
Yeah, they get more and more cartoonish, truly. In the second one, in Jack's RV, he has a mobile command unit.
I hate that mobile command unit.
Yeah, he's got high tech. And I think that's post 9/11 how we changed our view of the CIA. Because in 2000, sure, it's cloak and dagger shit, but it's meat and potatoes. Gumshoe spycraft, right?
Yeah.
It's the analog polygraph machine. It's literally Robert De Niro holding the pulse of Greg.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some little spy cameras or whatever, but by the second one, it's like, let me hack into the mainframe, secure link, update anywhere in the world or whatever, you know?
Yeah, DNA matching, facial matching, taking saliva samples. He's become Dr. Robotnik in the second one. He has like insane capabilities in his little mobile command unit. Getting more and more cartoonish as the series goes on. I find the third one is so bad because the central premise of the first one is that Greg craves acceptance from Robert De Niro. That's where all the humor is coming from, right? The third one takes place like 10 years into his marriage with Pam, where he has 2 kids, and Ben Stiller, one, is phoning it in like I've never seen an actor phone in a performance before. But he also doesn't really care anymore what Robert De Niro thinks of him. And so it's like, well, why are we still here? Maybe they could have played with that, with this idea that, hey, he's met the parents. Like at this point, he doesn't care what they think.
Yeah, isn't part of the development that you start to care less once you've started your own family? Right?
Right. But the movie just keeps oscillating between Greg does care about what Robert De Niro thinks, and then he doesn't care. It's a really, really bad performance. There's some scenes that are like zany enough to sort of recall the first one. There's a scene where Robert De Niro takes a Viagra and has an erection for longer than 4 hours. So Greg needs to shoot adrenaline into his penis through a needle, which is then witnessed by Greg's son, which I think is actually a plot point in Crank 2, High Voltage. So they have this scene in common.
Yeah, that was in the trailer. I saw that.
They put that in the trailer, right?
Yeah.
And then Robert De Niro says that he can erase his mind through some CIA mind erasing techniques.
That was also in the trailer. It sounds like they put the biggest laughs in the trailer.
Yeah, they had a lot of scenes in that movie where we're like, oh yeah, this is done for the trailer. It stars Jessica Alba, who is there to tempt Greg into doing adultery. Jessica Alba was my number one crush in the 2000s, so it was nice to see her. But she like sexually assaults Greg at the end of this movie in an extended scene. It's very weird. Not really relatable in the same way that the first movie is.
Yeah, a universal thing. Having a woman that looks like Jessica Alba throw herself at you. We've all been there.
And yeah, they haven't made one since. So we've met the parents.
All right, here's an idea for a sequel. Jack Burns has died, and it's the universal feeling of having to go to your in-laws' funeral. I think there's a lot of comedy potential there.
Okay. Yeah, and then he ruins the funeral. Yeah. And I think Robert De Niro might actually have the acting range left to perform in this movie. So yeah, Ben, is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think that's it. Just closing thought. I mean, we kind of burned this Echo in the Culture on the hook, but 2000s was the last dying breath of the pure, tight 90-minute comedy. You're there to laugh. You're there to have a good time. You are barely invested in the relationship that the movie is ostensibly about. That's just a frame device. It's a lost art form.
Yeah, comedies especially are way too long. You know, we love a tight 90 on this podcast, and this delivers perfectly. Let me see how long Meet the Fockers is. 115 minutes. It's almost 2 hours to Meet the Fockers. Getting away from their format in that way, too. Why? I watched Team America recently. That's like 1 hour 45. A South Park episode is the right length of amount of time for what you're doing here with the puppets. Or a robot chicken sketch, maybe. A long one. One of the ones near the back of the episode that goes on for like 10 minutes. To have me watch like over 100 minutes of the fake puppet movie. I mean, I respect the fact that they used real puppets and spent like $30 million doing that. I do respect that. I don't know. It definitely wore out its welcome with me.
Yeah.
But this movie does not. It's a tight 90. It plays with real relatable situations. I find that the cringe comedy hits better now than when I was a kid because I've been in this situation before.
There's something to be said for taking something and doing it well. The heightening in this movie is perfect. From jokes that don't land to desecrating the mother's ashes to flooding the yard with shit and starting a fire. It's just perfect heightening the whole way through.
And maybe that's why sequels generally don't work. is because you need to heighten. The first one was good, then it's heightened the right amount. And to heighten it further would only make the stakes cartoonish and the characters cartoonish. They've become Flanderized, right?
Yep.
And so this first one is so well paced. Every scene but the car chase to go home fits perfectly into the plot. I love it. A masterpiece. Other than the Pam character, no notes.
All right, that's been your Remember Shuffle. Hope you enjoyed a chill one. As always, please like, please subscribe, please write a comment, please engage. And truly, tell us if you enjoy the We Live in a Society episodes. I was a little ambivalent about doing drones because I thought it would be too depressing. And sure enough, one of the first comments was, I'm so ready to get depressed by this episode. We've done listener suggestions in the past, and they are always welcome. So if there's something you'd like us to talk about, please sound off in the comments.
Oh, I mean, a lot of people, they send us listener suggestions all the time, and they always apologize, and they're like, I'm sorry. And I'm like, yeah, don't apologize. I love hearing suggestions. I don't know that we'll be able to do it. No guarantees there, but I love hearing your suggestions for episodes. And quite a few times we've taken the suggestions, right? Like Zero Dark 30, I think, was a listener suggestion.
Slenderman was a listener suggestion.
So every now and then it might work, or it's something we keep in the back pocket for later. Yeah, as always, we appreciate all of the comments. One day I feel like we might do like a mailbag episode with some of the comments. And also, the people who give us a shout out on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, we love it. It makes our day, always.
Yeah. All right. As always, thank you for listening. Ciao, ciao.
See you later.
Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Little Jackie Paper loved that rascal Puff and brought him strings and sealing wax and other fancy stuff. Oh,